I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would betray her husband with his own father, but after that one forbidden night, everything changed. My life was perfectly ordinary. Married for 3 years to a sweet but distant man, living in the family home while we saved for our own place. Mornings were quiet routines, evenings blurred into the same familiar rhythm. Then came that evening in the dimly lit kitchen. Richard reached for a glass on the high shelf just as I turned to rinse mine. His arm brushed mine, barely there, yet the contact sent something electric through my skin. I caught the faint scent of his old-fashioned sandalwood cologne mixed with something darker, warmer, like aged wooden hidden longing. My pulse skipped. I told myself it was nothing, just an accident in a cramped space, but the air between us felt suddenly thinner. Living under the same roof meant those small encounters happened all the time, passing in the narrow hallway, our shoulders almost touching, sharing morning coffee while my husband had already left for work. Each time Richard's hand lingered a second too long when handing me a mug, his fingers brushing the edge of mine, I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest. Fussying myself with the spoon, the sugar, anything. "This is nothing," I whispered to the empty kitchen later. "Achi est twice my age. Achi est twice my age. Achi est lonely since his wife passed." Yet my body remembered the heat of that brief touch long after I left the room. I'd lie awake next to my sleeping husband, staring at the ceiling, heart thudding too loudly in the dark. "This is wrong," I thought, over and over, the words like a prayer I kept failing to believe. H.C.S. my father-in-law. He raised the man I married. I should feel nothing but respect. Still, drifting back to the way his voice dropped when he said my name low, careful, like it carried weight he didn't mean to show. The slow, guilty ache that followed made me turn away from my husband's back, ashamed of the way my skin felt too sensitive under the sheets. I hated how alive I suddenly felt in a house that had started to feel ordinary. One morning the coffee mug slipped a little as he passed it. Our fingers met properly this time, warm skin on warm skin for half a second longer than necessary. I looked up and his eyes held wine. Just for a breath, something unspoken flickered there, quiet and heavy. I forgot how to breathe. He smiled faintly, that gentle widower's smile. "It's hot." The words were innocent, the way they landed on me washed. I spent the rest of the day replaying that moment while folding laundry, while chopping vegetables, while pretending to read. Every ordinary task felt charged now, like the air itself was waiting. I told myself I was imagining it, that a man like Richard, steady, reserved, carrying years of quiet grief, would never look at his son's wife that way. But late at night, when the house was still and my husband's breathing even, the thought returned like a tide I couldn't push back. What if he felt it too? The guilt sat heavy in my stomach, twisting with something sharper, sweeter. I caught myself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, for the low rumble of his voice on the phone. I started noticing how the sandalwood scent clung to the couch cushions after he sat there, how the house felt different when he was near. I was ashamed. God, I was so ashamed. Yet when he said my name again the next evening, soft, almost hesitant while we cleared the dinner table, that slow ache bloomed once more, pulling me under like warm water I didn't want to escape. I kept telling myself to stop. I kept failing. And then, last night, while my husband was out late at a work dinner, Richard and I ended up alone in the living room. The lights were low. He handed me a book he'd left on the table, our hands meeting again. This time neither of us pulled away immediately. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist, light as a secret. My breath caught. He didn't speak. I didn't either. We just stood there, inches apart, the air thick with everything we weren't saying, and I felt the pull, dangerous and undeniable, tightening around us both. I kept failing. The next afternoon the sky split open without warning. Rain hammered the windows like it knew what was coming. I was in the laundry room wrestling with warm towels straight from the dryer when Richard appeared in the doorway. "Need a hand?" he asked, voice low against the downpour. I nodded before my mind could stop me. He stepped close. Too close. Our fingers met over the soft cotton, brushing again and again as we folded. Each touch sent a quiet spark up my arm. The heat from the towels lingered between us, mixing with the faint sandalwood that always seemed to follow him. I focused on the fabric, on the neat edges, on anything but how near his chest was to my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. The rain filled the silence. When the last towel was done, his hand stayed a moment longer than it needed to, thumb grazing the side of mine. I felt my pulse jump under my skin. He cleared his throat softly and stepped back, but the air stayed thick, charged like the storm had slipped inside the house with us. That night he fixed the faucet in the guest bathroom while I held the flashlight. The beam trembled in my grip. He knelt on the tiles, sleeves rolled up, strong forearm catching the light every time he reached. Once, when he shifted for a better angle, that forearm brushed my thigh through my thin robe. The contact was brief, accidental maybe, but it left a trail of warmth that refused to fade. I forgot to breathe for several heartbeats. The scent of his soap mixed with the metallic tang of tools and the dampness still clinging to the air from the rain. Almost got it. He murmured, voice rumbling close to my knee. I nodded, words stuck somewhere behind the ache blooming low in my stomach. When he stood wiping his hands, our eyes met in the dim light. Something unspoken passed between us again, heavier this time. I turned away first, mumbling thanks, and fled to my room with my heart hammering against my ribs. I can't want this, I told my reflection later, gripping the sink edge until my knuckles whitened. Achies, my husband's father. Achies grieving. Achies everything I shouldn't notice, yet every innocent moment kept replaying behind my closed eyes. The brush of fingers. The press of forearm. The way his breath had warmed the small space between us. I changed into a lighter robe after my shower, telling myself the house was simply too warm tonight. Nothing more. But my thoughts turned obsessive. In the quiet hours, I caught myself listening for the low rumble of his laugh drifting from the living room television. Each time it reached me, my chest tightened with a craving I had no right to feel. I started lingering in doorways, robe slipping just a little off one shoulder, pretending it was only for comfort while my skin flushed at the mere possibility his gaze might linger. The guilt gnawed at me constantly now, a sharp twist every time I remembered my wedding ring still sitting on the nightstand. This is wrong, I whispered into the mirror again and again, watching my own flushed cheeks betray me. Yet the hunger only grew, pulling me like gravity toward every small shared space in the house. Then came the night my husband left for his business trip. The door clicked shut behind him, and the house felt suddenly larger, emptier, more dangerous. I told myself I'd go to bed early. Instead, I stayed up reading on the couch, robe wrapped loosely, nerves humming. The thunderstorm hit without mercy. Lightning cracked the sky, and the power died in one startled breath. Darkness swallowed everything except the frantic beat of rain on the roof. I heard Richard moving in the kitchen, the soft strike of a match. Soon warm candlelight flickered across the walls. He carried 2 candles into the living room and set them on the coffee table. Storm knocked everything out, he said quietly, settling on the other end of the couch. You okay? I nodded, pulling my knees up. We talked then, voices soft against the thunder. About his late wife at first, the way her laugh used to fill these rooms, the quiet grief he still carried. His words were gentle, laced with years of missing someone. I listened, heart aching for him in ways that felt too tender, too close. An old jazz record played on the battery-powered player he found, slow saxophone curling through the candlelit dark like smoke. The music wrapped around us, intimate and slow. When his hand rested on my knee for comfort, the weight of it was solid, warm, calloused palm against bare skin where my robe had shifted. The texture sent a slow melt through me, unraveling the last careful knots of resistance I'd been clinging to. I didn't pull away. Couldn't. The rain kept falling outside, but inside the room everything narrowed to that single point of contact, his thumb tracing the smallest, unconscious circle against my knee. My breath grew shallow, unsteady. The scent of sandalwood and candle wax and something deeper, something undeniably him, flooded my senses until the rest of the world felt distant and unreal. He didn't speak. Neither did I. The jazz played on, notes stretching like secrets we weren't ready to name. Yet every second his hand stayed there, the pull between us tightened. Dangerous and sweet, until I could barely remember why this was supposed to be impossible. I shouldn't have moved first. Yet the moment the candle flamed danced across his face, something inside me gave way. My hand reached for his before my mind could stop it. our fingers laced, trembling, and then I leaned in, lips meeting his with a hunger that shocked us both. The kiss was gentle. It was years of quiet longing finally breaking free, warm and urgent, tasting faintly of the wine we'd shared earlier. His breath hitched against my mouth. "Longer than you know," he whispered, voice rough like gravel under bare feet. Between those stolen breaths, he told me everything. The hidden journal he kept locked in his study drawer, pages filled with my name. I laughed the way I tilted my head when I smiled. Entries dated back to the first family dinner, when I still called him only Richard and tried so hard to be the perfect daughter-in-law. He had loved me in silence, aching every time he watched me with his son, telling himself he would take the secret to his grave. Hearing it poured out between kisses made the last walls inside me shatter. We slid from the couch to the living room floor, candlelight flickering over us like a secret blessing we didn't deserve. My robe slipped open just enough for his work-worn hands to find the warmth of my back. The rough texture of his palms against my skin sent slow waves of heat through every inch of me. I surrendered completely that night, letting the storm outside mirror the one raging between us. No more pretending, no more fighting the pull that had been dragging us closer for years. In the weeks that followed, every time my husband's car disappeared down the driveway, the house transformed into our hidden world. We became experts at stealing time. I would find him in the garage after dinner, the scent of sandalwood and motor oil clinging to his shirt as I pressed close, burying my face against his neck just to breathe him in. His hands would settle on my waist, steady and sure, while the same old jazz record played softly from the living room, saxophone notes curling around us like invisible silk. We lost ourselves again and again in hushed desperation. The way his fingers traced slope as along my spine left me breathless, heart hammering so loud I was certain the neighbors could hear. One afternoon he pulled me into the shadowed hallway while my husband was still at the airport, his body warm and solid against mine, the low rumble of his voice murmuring my name like a prayer. Every stolen moment felt sharper, sweeter because we knew how fragile it all was. The ache of waiting only made the surrender deeper when we finally gave in. He was the patriarch, the quiet ruler of this house, and sometimes his touch carried an edge of possession that made my pulse race for entirely new reasons. A firm grip on my wrist when I tried to slip away too soon. The way his eyes would darken when he reminded me, softly, that this was his roof and under it, I was his in ways my husband could never understand. I wrestled with the guilt in silence every single day. Betraying my husband beneath his own father's roof felt like drowning in warm water, beautiful, suffocating, impossible to escape. Some nights I lay awake beside my sleeping husband, replaying Richard's whispered confessions, the journal entries he read to me by candlelight, and the way my body had answered without hesitation. The hunger never faded. If anything, it grew hungrier, pulling me back to him even when shame burned hottest in my chest. Last night, after my husband had gone to bed early, Richard found me in the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the distant tick of the grandfather clock. He stepped close, closer than safety allowed, his breath warm against my ear as he murmured how he still couldn't believe I had chosen him that stormy night. His hand rested possessively at the small of my back, fingers pressing just enough to remind me who held the balance here. I should have stepped away. Instead, I turned into him, heart pounding, already feeling the familiar melt, begin wondering how much longer we could keep dancing on this razor's edge before everything came crashing down. One evening, as the house slept under a thin blanket of moonlight, I slipped into the study again, drawn by that same pull I could never name. Fingers trembled over the old journal, flipping past the pages we'd shared until I landed on an entry dated months before that stormy night. The ink looked fresher than the rest, as if written with deliberate care. My breath caught sharp in my throat. He had planned it all. The suggestion to move us into this house, the quiet encouragement for my husband's endless work trips. Even the way he'd left small clues, like forgotten tools in the garage or late-night calls that pulled my husband away, to bring her closer. The words read, steady and unapologetic. She needs to see what real steadiness feels like. Ice water flooded my veins. I wasn't the one who discovered his secret. His secret had been hunting me from the very first day I crossed this threshold. Every shared glance in the hallway, every accidental brush of shoulders, orchestrated. The storm that night wasn't fate. It was the final thread in a web he'd been spinning since we arrived, I sat there on the worn leather chair, the journal heavy in my lap, shaking so hard the pages rustled like dry leaves. The intoxicating warmth of his touch from those stolen hours clashed violently with this cold calculation beneath it all. How many times had I melted into him, convinced it was mutual surrender? Now the memory of that first night tasted like ash on my tongue, bittersweet, poisoned at the root. Yet even as disgust rose, the ache didn't vanish. It twisted deeper, more dangerous. I couldn't walk away. Not yet. The hunger he'd awakened still hummed under my skin, a low current that made my pulse quicken at the mere thought of his voice. But I swore to myself in that trembling silence, I would never let him hold all the power again. From now on, I would be the one watching, the one choosing when to step close and when to pull back. The sweet gravity that once felt like falling into him now felt like standing on the edge of a cliff I refused to tumble from blindly. The grandfather clock struck 2, its chimes echoing through the empty rooms like a warning I was choosing to ignore. What would you do if you discovered the man you surrendered to had been pulling the strings all along? Would you run from the house that suddenly felt like a cage of his making? Or would the forbidden thrill keep you trapped, heart racing every time his shadow crossed yours in the hallway? I still haven't decided. Some nights the shame burns so fiercely ice where I'll pack my things at dawn. The memory of his breath against my neck pulls me under again, warm and relentless, leaving me breathless in the dark. If you want the raw, uncensored details of every charged glance, every whispered confession from that night and the dangerous nights that followed, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what would you have done in my place. More shocking stories are coming soon, but this one still keeps me awake, wondering how long a heart can balance between betrayal and craving before it finally breaks.